I'm glad you got one of the bookmarks.
I got one of the bookmarks.
Yes, good.
Séamus, it's so good to be here with you to talk about your new book, Decompose.
Thank you so much
I know
for
we're
having
going to
me.
talk about my new book a little later, but let's start with talking about your gorgeously designed book. You must be so excited. And this is your first.
It is. It's my debut.
It's your debut manuscript. I think it's just stunning, and congratulations.
Thank you.
And as I was going through it, I know that people are often interested in how did the book actually come to be? How long did it take, etc. And you, in your acknowledgments, thank your friend, the late Michael David Madonic. Am I saying it correctly?
You are.
And that in this book, that he read the first version 8 years ago.
Yes.
So, and that's what usually happens with books, right? You don't wake up one morning and say, okay, I've written all the poems and here's a book. It's over a period of time. So how much has the manuscript that Michael read changed from what we're seeing in Decompose?
So much. Like, it's not even the same. I think there's one poem that remains in it, and not the same even. It has a new title,
yes,
has a new form,
yes,
but it's extremely different. It's radically different. The only thing that's the same is the title. The title never changed.
So the title of the collection was always going to be Decompose.
It was always going to be Decomposed. There was a point where I tried to change it, and then I was talking to another poet, and they said, I said, what do you think a title could be? Do you have any title ideas? And they said, yeah, it's still Decompose. And I was like, damn, it is.
Okay.
It is.
And how much did that commitment to that title over at least an 8-year period, possibly longer, ground you in what you wanted to accomplish with the manuscript?
I think it helped because the idea of the manuscript is sort of this regeneration and rebirth. That's one of the reasons why the Luna moth is on the cover.
Yes.
Because the Luna moth is the primary symbol for regeneration, and I love that about it.
Yeah.
The title is such a broad theme.
Yes.
And so it was easy to stay in the theme, but also difficult in the way that it is a nebulous theme. It's like rebirth and generation are around us all the time.
All the time.
And always in our work to some degree.
To some degree, exactly.
It did help me ground it in, like, what are the poems that are specifically focused on that? What are the poems that helps, like, highlight the cycle?
Right. Further the understanding, arguably, of what the poems are trying to do.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And how do they fit together?
Yeah.
And do they fit together?
And that's one of the challenges I always face is, okay, so I have this group of poems, and which one should come before or after which other one?
Right.
Which should be the opening? Which should be the closing?
Right.
What is the arc? Everybody talks about the arc. Sometimes I feel like saying, I don't have an arc. Was that a difficult process for you? For some people, they say it's not that difficult, that the poems seem to be in conversation with each other and come to a natural way of being adjacent to one another. Was that your experience, or did you
It was difficult.
Struggled with it a little bit more?
Many different iterations of the journey, the ordering. I ended up going with tarot, actually.
Oh, okay.
So, in the major arcana, we go from death to temperance.
Yes.
Death being what you have to give up and let die in order to become a new version of yourself, and temperance being what it feels like when you sort of reconnect with yourself and reconnect with your divine path.
Yes.
And then I made a card in the middle I called the footstep card. And it's where you're just leaving death and you feel like you're dying, but you just have to keep taking one step at a time until you reach yourself again.
That's brilliant.
So the book goes footstep, temperance, death, footstep, temperance, death, footstep, temperance, death.
Okay, I knew you were using the tarot, but I don't think I was thinking of it in quite that way. And that's such a great idea, to use something like the tarot as an organizing principle and to plug the poems in the way that you're describing.
Well, my editor was saying that the original edit that I sent to her, that order she said it didn't feel like it was guiding her through with a torch. And she said it would be a good idea for me to do something. And I had thought that so many of these poems fit into those tarot cards, because that was the cycle.
Exactly.
And so I just gave it a shot and it worked.
I'm getting more in tune to the idea that if you're going to organize a manuscript, sometimes you have to find something a little bit out of the manuscript to like a hanger or something. If you're hanging a piece of clothing on it, to give it its shape.
Yeah.
Right? So I love that idea. Love so many poems in the book, but there's one in particular, and before we talk about it, I'd like for you to read it first. Lesbians Are Exhausting at page 20.
Okay, before I read this poem, there are many footnotes. When I'm reading a footnote, I'm going to put my hand up and I'll put it down when I get back to the poem. Lesbians are exhausting. A monarch butterfly, you, soars into the jacaranda tree. I tell myself it's not a sign, it's their season. Then there are two, fluttering in and out of each other. Hummingbirds, you, circle me like I'm covered in pollen. The sidewalk is more like a ramp because of tree roots that refuse to be paved over, you. Hibiscus reaching through the fence, unable to be contained, you. This matcha, the same forest as the buttons on your shirt. Soft piano from my headphones, a song I haven't skipped, you. Another hummingbird, me, climbs the tree in search of a certain nectar, doesn't find it, leaves. Jacaranda blossoms coat the sidewalk, a purple masterpiece, you. And why can't they just be fucking flowers?
Did the idea of the footnotes occur simultaneously with the writing of the poem? Or after you wrote the text, did something come to you that made the idea of inserting the footnotes seem like a good one?
It all kind of came together at once.
Okay.
The footnotes, I wanted them to feel like an interruption because the poem, what I was trying to get across with this poem is, well, I guess the title, Lesbians Are Exhausting.
Yes.
Only in the way that, like, well, as I've told you, I don't identify as a lesbian anymore because I started transitioning. Now I identify as queer and trans, although I always liked the queer identification anyway.
Yes.
But I kept this poem with this title because it's such a specific portal to a marker in time for me.
Okay.
But it happened at the same time because footnotes for me, I read a lot of theory and sometimes they feel like an interruption. Like I'm just trying to get through the text and I have to stop to go find the footnote and go back, and it feels like it messes up with the rhythm. The way that these moments felt like they were messing up the rhythm of the speaker. Like the speaker's just trying to take a walk, but can't help but be interrupted, and I wanted the footnotes to illustrate that.
It was such a great idea, and it's so great to hear you read it because this goes to the issue of what happens after the poet puts whatever text they've proposed to put on the page. How does the reader take it in? And when I was reading it, even though I was reading the footnotes silently, so I wasn't saying the you and then at one point you say me. I wasn't saying that out loud to myself as I was reading it. I was going back and forth. And that's something that we as poets can't control, how someone takes it in, but that's why it's always so great to hear the poet give voice to the piece. And it's also interesting to me to know that you were also thinking simultaneously of how can I cause a disruption in this poem. And as we talk a little bit more, you'll see I have an interest in footnotes as well, but certainly was thinking of them differently than you've been thinking of them. Are you planning to do more like this? Does this feel like a good technique? I like this idea of interruption.
I probably will.
Yeah.
I think this was after a breakup, and so it was helpful because at the time, I did feel like I couldn't do anything without that sort of taking up space, and I was so sick of that person taking up space in my mind.
Yes.
And so I think that, yeah, this speaker really reflects that in that way. I haven't had a breakup in that long since then, but I do think it's a good technique for when things are taking up so much space. Like, And I would like to use it again. It hasn't happened naturally, but maybe I should go out of my way.
Well, I think it's very successful, and it was really one of many of the poems that jumped out at me that I wanted to talk to you about. And in the course of that, you have another poem on page 47, Potential, which, could you read that one as well? Because I want to ask you a question or two about that.
So this poem is a triptych. So if any of you who are watching or listening don't know how a triptych works, there's 3 different stanzas. I'll read them down and then I'll read them across. Potential. Does your boyfriend do it for you, really? Does he hold you like a little crystal in your palm? Know your healing potential? Know where your veins meet, yes. Your heart, yes. Where you tick and release, yes, I know, I see it. Joy is resting between us. Do you want me to wake it? I could gently shake eyes open, myself. Does your boyfriend know where your joy is resting? Do it for you, really? Veins meet, yes, between us. Does he hold you, your heart, yes. Do you want me to? Like a little crystal, where you wake it in your palm. Tick and release. I could gently know your healing, yes, I know. Shake eyes open, potential, I see it myself.
That's the assumption that I made reading this poem, that it was to be read down and to be read across.
Yes.
And I wondered what, if anything, was the inspiration for using this triptych style, or was it just organically, again, something that came out of you?
It did come out, but I will say I was doing, have you seen Dr. Taylor Bias in my form calendars?
I haven't seen your form calendars.
So every April we make a form calendar, and it has a bunch of forms to try for your 30, if you're doing the 30 for 30 poems in 30 days. So it was a triptych day.
Okay.
And it just happened. I love to say I have poems stuck in my throat. I had this poem stuck in my throat for, I think, over a year.
Yes.
And then the triptych just unlocked it.
Fabulous.
And
Fabulous.
I felt very lucky because triptychs are really hard.
They're really hard to do, and it reminded me of Tyemba Jess's Olio, where he, right? He drives you crazy.
God,
Up, down,
so
cross,
good.
diagonal. Yes, exactly. But this is terrific. I know he would love this. Well, I am going to ask you if I can share my footnote poem that you and I talked about a little bit.
Yes.
And maybe we can discuss that because it comes from a different place.
Great.
And this is in my new collection, Blue on a Blue Palette. My alchemist's dream in cursive. Because for all of us, it's about ownership. We don't recognize value in anything that doesn't belong to us, and so we fear we are impoverished. Poor we. Haven't we seen a seagull dip her wing into sun's shadow and been glad she is seagull, free and flying away from us? And if we are glad, is it because we know we are rich in everything we need to be rich in? Because we sense all the magic that will suffice, chemistry of light and dark, love and its seekers. The way sea is deeply deep because it hears a pygmy whale's bellow and knows that bellow is thousands of years old. Perhaps you heard a narwhal indistinctly last night. Perhaps while you were dreaming she found you and made you grateful you were sleeping and thus posed no threat to her voyage, no danger to her true nature, to join the way a poet joins one symbol to another, tail fluke to tusk, recognizing the ocean's value with neither title nor ownership, leading us all to dream, as all true alchemists do.
I love this poem. I love how it does feel very different, to call back to what you were saying. I was curious, had you always planned to have the poem be in the footnotes, or did you try writing it on the page and then discovered that the whole poem belonged in the margins?
This poem goes back several years, and its initial impetus was the title. The poet and visual artist, I hope I'm pronouncing the name correctly, Sam Rojas Chua, is a poet that works in this writing, that the pen never leaves the page. And visually, for me, it's very, it almost looks like a Cyrillic language, and his poems jump from that work. So I wanted a poem to jump from this line of one of his poems, which I loved the line, "My alchemist dream in cursive." At the same time, I was thinking about ownership and how we as humans, Americans in particular, it seems to me, are all about ownership. And if they don't own it, it doesn't have any value, right? As opposed to the whale that just goes on the voyage and doesn't belong to any of us. So I was trying to play with those ideas. And so it did seem to me that I wanted to tell that story that arguably was unrelated to this title, but I really wanted to use this title. So I thought the way to flush out the title was to footnote it. That's the way I thought. But that idea, generally about the footnotes, came from reading a poem in an issue that I can no longer find of Best American Poetry. And the poet, I also don't know who the poet was. I don't remember anything but that there was a title. It wasn't footnotes, I don't believe, and a lot of white space and text at the bottom of the page. And because I couldn't find it, and I couldn't make it work logically in my head without it being footnotes, which is bizarre, I decided to make it footnotes. So I've written a couple like this, and I like that idea of flushing out whatever it is that the title is presenting to the reader by really looking at every word and assigning it a meaning. So that was really how it came to be.
It fits so perfectly. I know you're saying that you feel like the narwhal and the whale had nothing to do with the poem, but they fit so perfectly because, so we go my, and then because for all of us it's about ownership, boom, I'm there.
Right.
Alchemists, we are rich in everything we need to be rich in, yes. I mean, the whole idea of alchemy is you have everything you need to create.
Exactly.
And then dream is when you bring in the sea creatures.
Yes.
And that makes sense to me. We're talking about dreaming. Anything can happen in dreams. Anything can come in.
Well, I think it's similar to what's happening in the potential poem of yours that we read. It allows the reader to take the poem in multiple ways.
Yes.
They can just read it straight. Okay, that's the title. I know she put those footnotes, but who cares? And read the text. But hopefully they do what you did of saying, okay, but why is footnote? Oh, I see how they're arguably matching or not matching. If the reader's free to disagree.
Yeah.
But it does offer an opportunity similar to the triptych to say, let me see the different ways that I can be inside of this poem.
Exactly.
You know?
So when I read with the footnotes, then I read it through, and I tried, I think I read it each way twice.
Right.
And I loved both experiences. I couldn't decide which one I liked more.
I'm sure I'll do another footnote poem someday. I'm going to be thinking about that idea of interruption.
Yeah.
It's so valuable in poetry, I think. You know, a poet might talk about caesura, but the interruption of the footnotes arguably is accomplishing the same thing.
I was wondering also about this book, and I know it is not your debut.
Right.
But I was wondering, does it feel like you're debuting? What does it feel like you're debuting with this book?
I think, for me, it feels as though I've stepped up my game a little bit with my poetry, that I've stretched myself in ways that I didn't in the prior books. I'm very proud of it. It's about women primarily. The struggles of women, the rage of women, the marginalization of women, the murder of women, and yet the survival, always the survival of women. So that's what I was really trying to get across in a variety of settings in which we come across women like we come across that other gender. So I feel good about it. I feel like I accomplished what I had set out to do, even though it wasn't a project book. I had a friend who said, Lynn, if you've got some poems, why don't you pull them together while I was serving as Poet Laureate, and people will be interested in that just because of the title. I'm no different than I was before the title or after the title, but he thought that that would be a good idea. And I said, well, I'm not sure I have a book. And then similar to what you're saying with the tarot, I found there was blue in so many of the poems, either the color or the idea of the blues. And I started to wrap the poems around that. So that's why I was interested in your idea about the tarot, because for those of us who struggle a little bit more in how to put a collection together, finding that organizing principle, I think, can be so, so important.
Yeah, I love the title Blue on a Blue Palette. Obviously, I have a different experience as a trans mask person.
Sure.
But I did find that what I loved about it was it's all these different shades of womanhood and the blues.
Exactly.
And it was such a great title. I love it so much. I was wondering, could you read Lost Sonata?
Oh,
on
sure.
page 94?
Absolutely. Lost Sonata. Tonight, I am as tippery as I've ever been as I hear the stars' contrived sonata in a firmament with its color constantly ebbing. I am as naked as the imbalance of an electrical charge. Or I am swimming along the ruined coastline of Guinea-Bissau, where I am no more lost than in my own living room. My lovers ask a trick question, and then they ask me again, babbling, daily, differently, like every percussive instrument, like a calabash, like a kora. It doesn't matter. Everything is imitation. Everything is almost what it's meant to be, my mud of a mind making paper mache out of all that's unextraordinary. And by now, dear reader, you are as confused as anyone. With that, know this. Tonight, I'm tippery among fireflies, my unlover's palms circling my want.
I love this poem.
I rarely read it. Thank you for that.
Of course. I have a couple of questions about it, but I wanted to know, does the lost in the title come from where we sort of, where the speaker sort of exits the poem?
I'm not sure I was thinking of it in quite that way, but perhaps similar in that essentially feeling lost, no matter where I was. And that was why the line about whether I'm in Guinea-Bissau or in my own living room, I'm lost wherever I am. So yes, it was something along that line.
I've been thinking a lot about the interruption of when the speaker brings the reader in.
Yes.
Like when the reader is now brought into the poem, and I love that moment. And by now, dear reader, you are as confused as anyone, because I feel like it's the speaker reaching out a hand.
Yes.
And acknowledging your presence.
Yes.
And it makes me as a reader feel very present.
That was the goal. I was really thinking of one of my brothers who told me, not reading this poem, but some other poem, what in the world is going on in this poem? I don't get it. I'm confused. And I said, oh, no, it's very simple. It's this. He said, yeah, right. And so because this poem was constructed where I literally wanted one sentence, whatever I thought next, that was going to go in the poem.
Okay.
The theory being that ultimately it would make sense. But just in case it didn't, I wanted the reader to know, I get it. You may be confused. It's fine. Just go with me here.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
The speaker's really just saying, just roll with me.
Yeah.
Just stay along. Yeah, I absolutely loved this poem. My other favorite was Poinsettias and Other Continuums of Forgetting.
Poinsettias and Other Continuums of Forgetting. Remember this irony? Art makes order out of chaos. Maybe I need to write a poem about forgetting. The annual flowering of poinsettias in my mother's garden. The discovery that flowers can effuse a milk children cannot drink. I remember the day a man walked on the moon and one of us, looking out of the window, said, I don't see anyone. If time is a continuum, Didn't all this happen just yesterday? Maybe we are each a poem about forgetting. There was a man, I don't know him anymore, who had particular fingers, mostly squared at their tips. He had a particular scent which remains unassigned. He held out his hand. And what do I remember? He held out his hand, and it was a day bright lit as a galvanized penny, and we walked by the Pacific, and we, neither of us, remember seeing anything else. Maybe I should write a poem about the sea. That was a love poem, but I was also thinking about these poinsettias in my mother's garden that had milk, and my mother would say, "Stop trying to drink, that's not milk." I said, "But it looks like milk." And so all those ideas were kind of swimming in my mind, and I didn't want to start out with the love part of it that shows up in the second, or well, in the fourth stanza. So I just wanted to have this setup that all of these thoughts were occurring to me, thus the continuum that I referred to. And at the end, you think, okay, why not write about the sea? Because isn't that the ultimate continuum?
Yes.
Right? So thank you for that.
Yeah, and I love the parentheses in this poem. I think it does so much work. There was a man, I don't know him anymore. Got it. Yeah. It's like setting the scene.
Yes.
In theater, we talk a lot about the moment before.
Yes.
And you've just brought in, as a writer, the moment before and made it so abundantly clear.
I'm glad I was so clever about that. It seemed like it needed to be parenthetical as opposed to dashes, which you can tell from the poems. I like dashes, but it didn't quite feel right as a dash.
It feels like
it
a
needed
secret.
to have its own little secret place, right? And so, good. Well, good. I'm so glad that you like that. I'm so glad that we've had a chance to have this conversation.
Absolutely.
And I'm encouraging the audience to buy Decompose, this gorgeous book, and also buy Blue on a Blue.
Well, if any indication is given by how many poems I have noted, you should certainly buy Blue on a Blue palette.
Well, thank you so much. I appreciate that. I hope our readers will enjoy them both.